Please allow me to start today's sixth lecture of Professor Rajani Prasanna Endowment Lecture Series in Climate Change and its Impact on Public Health. I am Dr. Sanjay Pattanshetty, Head of the Department of Global Health Governance at Prasanna School of Public Health, MAHE, Manipal. It's really a happy feeling that I got a chance to interact with Mr. Nalli when he was with UNICEF in India, in the state of Andhra Pradesh, now Telangana, Andhra and Karnataka. Brief bio about Nalli sir is Mr. Salathiel Nalli is a water and environment professional currently working with UNICEF in Indonesia. For the last 26 years, Mr. Nalli has been working in helping communities to have access to safe water and clean environment, including during natural disasters. He recently worked as climate change manager with UNICEF in Maldives, raising the profile of small island developing states at the global climate negotiations. Mr. Nalli has a master's in hydrogeology and an advanced master's in groundwater exploration. So with us also we have Professor Rajani Prasanna, benefactor, Prasanna School of Public Health. We welcome you to this event, madam. I also welcome Mr. D.A. Prasanna, Chief Patron, Prasanna School of Public Health, MAHE, Manipal. Professor Helmut Brand, Founding Director, Prasanna School of Public Health, MAHE, Manipal. So with these few words, I would like to reiterate the importance of today's session. Small island developing states are a distinct group of 38 UN member states and 20 non-UN member bar associate members of United Nations regional commissions that face unique social, economic and environmental vulnerabilities. Climate change has a very tangible impact on small island and developing states. Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria and Nate turned the 2017 tropical cyclone season into one of the deadliest and most devastating of all time, destroying communications, energy and transport infrastructure, homes, health facilities and schools. Slow onset events such as sea level rise pose an existential threat to small island communities, requiring drastic measures such as relocation of population and the related challenges this poses. These challenges are compounded by limited institutional capacity, scarce financial resources, and a high degree of vulnerability to systemic shocks. I am quoting this statement from the reference from the United Nations Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States. So with this clear emphasis of this topic, I hand over this forum to Mr. Nalli. Sir, a very warm welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sanjay. It's a privilege to be here. And yeah, dear friends and all the climate champions who are attending this session, warm welcome to this lecture series on climate change and its impact on public health. So in this lecture, we will be discussing on the impact of climate change on small island development states. We will look at the hazards, the short-term, medium-term and long-term projections, and the impacts and adaptation measures which they are currently taking. Of course, as you know that all countries, including SIDS countries, will have their own unique characteristics. So this time today I want to take an example of a very interesting country called Maldives, where I had an opportunity to do some very interesting work on climate change, along with other small island development states. So I thank the authorities of Manipal Academy for giving me this opportunity, especially my good friend Dr. Sanjay, who has a keen desire to improve public health in India. I had a privilege of working with him few years back in supporting the government of Karnataka on wash facilities in health centers in the state. And also, I want to acknowledge the renowned people who are the backbone of this whole public health movement in Manipal, and who laid the foundation for this lecture series. Professor Rajani Prasanna, Benefactor Prasanna School of Public Health, Mr. D.A. Prasanna, Chief Patron, Prasanna School of Public Health, Professor Helmut Brand, Founding Director, Prasanna School of Public Health, and all the other dignitaries who are present in this meeting. So when we look at climate change, as you know that it refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural as through variations in the solar cycle, but since 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal and oil and gas. So I don't know how many of you are believers in climate change and how many don't believe. But the important point here is that we are seeing the impact of climate change in our day-to-day lives. And when we look at the scenarios, when we look at the rainfall patterns, when we look at the disasters which are happening across the world, and definitely we see that there is a changing trend. So some people say that this is a natural trend, but there is a increasing scientific evidence which says that definitely there is a natural trend of different climate patterns. But since maybe around 100, 150 years, there is a increasing evidence that the human activities are significantly contributing to this change. Now, when we look at this small island development states, we can see where they are. Some are they're mostly in around the equator, so mostly the tropical areas, where we can see in extreme left we have Caribbean, where we have 28 islands, and we have Atlantic Ocean, and we have one in Arabian Sea, very interesting, which is Bahrain. And then we have one in Indian Ocean, 4 in Indian Ocean, including Maldives, and then one in South China Sea, which is it's also a very interesting country we joined here, which is Singapore, and also many countries in Pacific. So when the aggregate population of all these small island development states is very small, around 65 million, less than 1% of the population. But because of this small population, these countries, as you know, in front of big countries like China and India, so they are very neglected. But this group faces very special socioeconomic and environmental challenges. So some of the challenges are because of this remote geography. So like I lived in Maldives, and then it's extremely expensive, everything. If they have to grow a plant, so they have to import soil. They have to get water, maybe desalinated water. So they have to get fertilizer. So nothing is available in these small islands, and you can't grow anything. They are very small islands, and then everything you have to import. from distant countries. And the perishable items like fruits and vegetables are the most expensive. And when we see the impact of climate change, it's significant. And so one thing we can also realize that not all small island development states, SIDS countries, are poor. So there are some rich countries also. So we saw Bahrain and Singapore and other countries. But their costs are much more. And because of their limited small population, so accessing finance and accessing the loans from the banks and all that is extremely difficult. So when we look at different types of small islands, so broadly they can be classified into 5 types. So one is the continental islands, where you have islands at the end of the continent, fringe of the continent, where they depend mainly on the continent. And then there are volcanic islands like Indonesia, where I'm there. So most of the islands are full of volcanoes. They're formed by that. And reef islands like Maldives, very interesting group, these reef islands, because they are formed by coral reefs on a million-year time period. And they are extremely flat, no elevated area, nothing. And then we have raised limestone islands and composite islands, which are a combination of different characters, what we saw here. So when we look at what are the elements which are affecting these small islands, so we see that there are like global warming and increase of temperatures. So this is one of the elements which affects the small islands. And these islands, as you know that as we saw, they're all in the around the equator. So they face intense heat and heat stress. And we can see that ocean acidification is another element. So the trend is when they measure the pH value of the ocean, so over 200 years, there is a trend of increasing, so which is really harmful for the sea life. And also we see that sea levels is a very important threat, because they're all islands. All the 4 sides, the water will keep increasing. And with higher emissions, the sea levels will keep rising. And the sea level rise combining with storm surges and waves during high tides, during storms, during like monsoon activity. So the islands are constantly 24 hours battered by the waves, impounding waves. And they lose a lot of coastal area, beaches and other protective environment around their island. And as we know that shorelines retreat along saline areas, sandy coasts. So according to this IPCC 6th assessment report, which just released maybe 3-4 months back. So these small islands are a special group of islands. When we talk about climate change, so they are the most affected, most vulnerable, and that is where the action have to start. So next, when we look at some of the key risks of the small islands, so all these climate risks are interconnected. So, and the like origin for these risks, so broadly can be categorized into three. So you see on the left and the right and the top. So on the left, you see that slow onset of ocean changes, which includes ocean acidification and increase in ocean temperatures, and also sea level rise. Then on the top, you see another element, which is slow onset of climate changes. So in terms of temperatures, in terms of rainfall pattern, there is a change of intensity as well as frequency. And on the right side, you can see that changes in extreme events like storm surges, increase of storm surges, cyclones, heat waves, and El Nino, and also many other factors. So changes like in these extreme events. So based on this, so there are actually 8 risks which are categorized, and which includes loss of marine and coastal biodiversity, submergence of reef islands. Like when we look at Maldives, so increasingly more and more habitations, which are once people are living, so they are vacating the islands because it is becoming unfit to live. So they are slowly getting submerged under the water as the years go by. And the loss of biodiversity, water insecurity, and the destruction of infrastructure, degradation of human health and well-being, economic decline, and loss of cultural resources and heritage. Now, when you look at all these key risks, so these all will contribute to reduced habitability of islands. So that means, so many people predict that countries like Maldives, who are flat, and as the sea level is rising, so by 2100, so the whole country might disappear from the world map, and then people have to move somewhere else. So that is a big discussion which is going inside the country, and the whole world need to think about it. So when we look at the elements of health, the relation between climate change and health, of course, climate change may not directly impact the health, but it multiplies the existing health vulnerabilities, which includes food security, access to safe water, sanitation, healthcare, and so on. So it contributes to multiplying the vulnerabilities, existing vulnerabilities of health. And we see that between 2030 and 2050, so they have estimated that around 250,000 additional deaths will happen due to climate change. So these additional deaths only due to malnutrition, malaria, and diarrhea, and heat stress. And also, we look at the areas with weak health infrastructure. They are going to be severely affected. So, as you know, that most poor countries, they do not have adequate health infrastructure. Now, when the climate change is compounding that issue, and the people will get a severe issue with the health infrastructure. So there is a lot of relation and also impact on health outcomes due to climate change, where we'll be looking a little more in the coming slides. So coming back to the Maldives, where we are taking as a case example for this lecture. So it's a archipelago of 26 low-lying coral atolls and something around 1,200 small tropical islands. Out of that, less than 200 are inhabited by population. So the remaining 1,000 islands are just there, nobody lives there. And there are another 60 resort islands. Now, these islands, as I said, so these are formed by corals. So they form in the shape of atolls. So a ring of islands. So these coral reefs are built by corals for a millions of years period along a ring around supposed to be a volcano. So this ring of islands are called atolls, and each atoll is in one specific location. And one atoll to one atoll and one island to island, the only mode of transport is through water. So it is the lowest and flattest country. So you can imagine a flat surface and increasing sea levels. So it is a deadly combination. So more than 80% of the total area is less than 1 meter above mean sea level. And you look at the population, it is only little bit above 500,000. Very, very limited population when we compare with any city or like a sub-district or a district of India. So it's a very, very negligible number. So very small population. And so for them to manage the country, manage the whole climate catastrophe is a big challenge for the government. So when we look at the natural hazards in Maldives, so one of the hazard is the heat waves. And we look at the mean annual temperature is around 27.6. But by 2100, so it will slowly increase. And there will be increased number of days with heat index of more than 35 degrees centigrade. And drought. So it's very interesting to understand how a drought can happen in a small island. Yeah, of course, they do not grow much agriculture. They do not do much agriculture. But whatever islands where there is agriculture, so there will be lack of water, both for agriculture, both for drinking. So the only way is to transport water from one island to another island, or islands which have desalinated plants. From there, they have to transport the water. So it's a very expensive affair. And floods. So floods are one of the frequent natural events in Maldives. Now, when the floods happen, so the water have to go into the sea. So when it rains, at the same time, sea also will be in a very active state. So the waves will be stronger, and the waves start coming into the island, and the rainwater wants to go into the sea. So there is a big conflict, and so there will be number of days where the whole island will be inundated. So they have to pump out the water with motors for days together. So yeah, these are all possible, but you can see what it takes and how expensive it is to live in a small island. The cyclones, Maldives is better protected than other places, so they don't actually get affected by cyclones like India, Sri Lanka, Philippines, and all those areas. But still, in the north side of the country, there are more incident of cyclones because it is near to Arabian Sea as well as to Indian subcontinent. And tsunamis, of course, tsunamis are one of the most destructive forces. So one of the blessing in disguise is because these are coral islands. So around every island, there will be a coral reef, which is a very powerful protective reef for high tides and devastating cyclones and all. But still, the tsunami which happened, Indonesia tsunami or Asia tsunami in 2004, it affected many islands in Maldives, even though it is very far, even though there are reefs around it. So what can they do if the sea level increases for maybe few minutes or few hours? So they cannot do anything except all the seawater coming into the island. And also storm surge and swell waves, which are due to high tides and monsoon activities in Maldives. So these are the natural hazards which the country is facing. And when we look at all these projections, so it's very alarming actually. So regardless of the emission scenario, so that means, as you know, that there is a direct link between carbon emissions and climate change. So that means carbon emissions and sea level rise, carbon emissions and temperature rise. So if the emissions are low or high, irrespective of that, so the temperature is going to increase up to 1.6 degrees centigrade by 2040. And sea surface temperature is going to increase up to 1.3 degrees centigrade. So that means the temperature of the sea is going to increase gradually. By 2060, as much as 2 degrees centigrade, it is going to increase. And you know, many of the ocean life is very, very sensitive to temperature changes. So the coral reefs are going to be severely affected. And also a lot of aquatic organisms are going to be affected. So if you look at over the years, so what is going to be the temperatures? So if you look at the first column, so you see the higher temperatures around 30 degrees and above 30 degrees in the first column. That means 2011 and 2020. Only in 1 or 2 islands on the north. But when it comes to 2021 to 2030, so these higher temperatures, it almost occupied half the country. And looking at 2031 to 2040, the higher temperatures now, it covered more than 3/4 of the country. And by 2050, the whole country is going to be with higher temperatures. So this is a scientific prediction, and this is how the country is going to be. And there is a lot required for adaptation. So now coming to sea level rise projections. So in low emission scenario, by 2060, the sea levels are going to rise by 20 centimeters, 0.2 meters. And if the emissions are high, so it is going to be 30 centimeters. So what does it mean for like country like Maldives? So 10 centimeter sea level rise, that means 88% of the total area is going to be submerged. And 6.5% of the population are going to be affected. So if 30 centimeter sea level rise, 24%, like 1/4 of the whole country will be underwater. And around 20% of the population are going to be affected or displaced, or they have to go somewhere else. And looking at the rainfall projections. So again, this rainfall coupled with temperature rise and sea level rise. So is a very difficult scenario. So the precipitation change will be like by 2060. If you look at the high emission scenario, will be 13% change. So that means there will be 30% plus, that means higher rainfall at any time of precipitation. So that means the inundation due to floods will be 13% more. So when we look at the combined factors of all these, effect of temperature and rainfall, so coastal flood mortality so will increase. And like Maldives is one of the 2 countries in South Asia that will be most affected by increase in diarrhea related mortality between 2030 and 2050. Look at malaria. So malaria is not very rampant, but by 2050, so around 25,000 people. So it's a small number, but when we look at the country size of the country, so it is 5%. 5% of the people are going to be affected by malaria. And dengue also projected to be increased over a period of time. So when we look at the impacts of climate change, so the immediate impacts, which include mortality, physical harm, storms, droughts, water scarcity, and longer term impacts when we look at, so that means maybe 20 years to 30 years down the line. So we can see loss of livelihoods and undernutrition due to change in food patterns, loss of agriculture, and disease vectors, change of disease vectors, migration. It can be internal displacement or migrating to other countries, and many humanitarian emergencies. So these are the impacts of longer term impacts of climate change. So when we look at intergenerational impacts, maybe more than 50 years, what are going to be the impacts? It's loss of natural resources, loss of opportunities, and perpetual cycles of poverty. So people go into poverty depths again and again and again. Inequity and deprivation of basic human rights. So these are the impacts which are going to happen. Now, in Maldives, there are specific areas where the impacts are exemplified here. Water, coastal zones, coral reefs, fisheries. So what is the impact which is going to happen? And also agriculture, tourism. So tourism is the main economic activity in Maldives. So like around 50% of the government income comes through tourism. So if the tourism collapses, there is no income for Maldives. So in the long term, now when the sea levels are rising and coastal erosion is becoming rampant, so there will be significant effect on the tourism. And that is one area which the countries like Maldives will be affected significantly. And we can also see the heat-related mortality. So as you know that the human body's ability to regulate temperature is up to a certain extent. But beyond that, so it's going to affect the body of every human being who is exposed to higher temperatures, more than 35 degrees centigrade. So many people will undergo heat-related medical conditions, especially the elderly, children, chronic illnesses, people with chronic illnesses, and socially isolated people. So when we look at the impact of climate change on human health, as we looked at, there are 4 elements: rising sea levels, increasing carbon dioxide levels, rising temperatures, more extreme weather. So the impacts will be from severe weather, there will be injuries and mental health impacts. Due to air pollution, there will be cardiovascular diseases and asthma. Due to changes in vector ecology, so you'll have increase of malaria, dengue, encephalitis, hantavirus, Rift Valley fever, and other diseases. Due to increasing allergens, so there will be respiratory allergies and asthma. Due to water quality impacts, there will be waterborne diseases. And due to water and food supply, so you'll have an issue of malnutrition and diarrheal diseases. Due to environmental degradation, there will be forced migration, civil conflicts, and mental health impacts. So these are the impacts you can see in human health due to climate change. So now what is Maldives doing? So they are doing many adaptation measures. And as I told you before, every adaptation measure is extremely expensive. And they cannot do everything, so they have to choose. If there are 25 places which are getting inundated, so they'll have money to do only one place this year. And other 24 places people will be waiting. So one is seawalls, constructing seawalls to reduce the impact of tidal waves and storm surges. And the other adaptation measure is elevated infrastructure. So right now the government is encouraging everybody to build their houses at least 1 meter above the ground level. So 3 feet above the ground level, and all other infrastructure. Then looking at the artificial islands. So this is another important adaptation measures. So create islands as the islands are submerging, create new islands, and create islands with maybe 1 or 2 meters higher than the existing sea level. So this is one Hulumal Island where most of the people live there, which is connected to the capital city Malé, because the capital city is going to be submerged very soon, which is constructed at 6 feet higher. And artificial reefs for eco, like a bioeco measures in the sea. So creating artificial sea, this is a 3D printed artificial reef. So around this, the corals, they will build their nest, and which will be habitation for most of the aquatic life. And the most interesting and the most recent one is the floating islands. So this is the first experiment in the world where floating islands is being constructed. So this floating island is expected to accommodate around 30,000 people. So built in the middle of a lagoon where the water is relatively stable. So this floating island, the idea is that as the sea levels rise, the city also will rise. Very fascinating and a very long-term, and an interesting project. So like this, you have much of the country. So there are several other adaptation measures, including for farming and agriculture, looking at trying out different varieties of seeds which are can be tolerant for slight salinity. As you know, the water, as you extract clean water, the saline water keeps intruding into the island. So to flush it out, it requires a large amount of rainfall to happen on that island systematically. And for improving the health system, so the CDC, Center for Disease Control in US Atlanta, they developed a BRACE framework, building resilience against climate effects. So this is primarily developed to handle health-related climate impact. So which consists of 5 components. Yeah, the first one is forecasting climate impacts and assessing vulnerabilities. And the second one is projecting the disease burden. So what is the disease burden? Maybe it can be malaria or diarrhea. So in 20 years, 40 years. So based on that, we can equip our health centers. Then assessing public health interventions, whether they are adequate for the future. And developing climate and health adaptation plan. And evaluating impact of improving quality of activities. So these are the 5 steps we can see how we can equip our adaptation measures, especially the health systems in the countries of SIDS. So lastly, when we look at some of the enabling conditions and factors for adaptation in small islands, one of the most important thing is when we design and develop adaptation strategies, it's very important to rely on indigenous knowledge or local knowledge. The second one is climate information has to be accessible to everyone. The third element is economic diversification. And the fourth element is financial models for adaptation. And the next one is improved coordination between government departments and other stakeholders. And related to infrastructure, so it requires a clear and strict building codes. And we also need to build social networks and capacity during disaster so they can recover faster. And also the empowerment of migrating individuals. So these are some of the factors for adaptation in small islands. So we have to realize that these adaptation measures will help these small island development states to have a sustainable adaptation for climate change, so they can continue to live in that their own habitation for a longer time. So as we are all like academic group, so I also thought to share some of the research gaps in small island communities. So one of the important gap which I have identified, so when I was working there, is that so you don't have climate data for islands. So for the country, you have a data, and so the climate scientists, they were able to develop up to atoll level. So atoll is a group of islands, around 20 to 30 islands. But each island, we don't have data because the islands are so small. So it's very difficult to downscale the data to the island level. So that is one major area of research which is required, like how to calculate climate data for island level. The second area is vulnerability of island ecosystem services to climate change. So what are these vulnerabilities? Because not all islands are same, and not island ecosystems are same. So we need to identify what are the vulnerabilities. It can be mangroves, or it can be coral reefs, it can be microforests or wetlands, whatever it may be. And another area of research which is required is in terms of ecosystem, benefits of ecosystem, quantification of that. So what is the benefit of ecosystem? So we need to understand the benefit and try to appreciate and try to protect the ecosystem. So the countries need to understand, if they protect this ecosystem, what are the benefits and how much is that? So that is an area of information which is missing. And also projected risks and adaptation responses. So right now the adaptation responses are copied from one place to another. So like, for example, in Maldives, if one island, you build a seawall, every island wants it, whether it requires or not. So there is a lot of research which is required in terms of, in each island, what are the projected risks and what are the adaptation responses which are required. And also linkages between adaptation limits, loss and damage, and transformative adaptation. So loss and damage is one of the agreement which was signed during the last COP27, November 2022. So between the countries. Now, so based on that, we need to have information or data related to the linkage between the limits of adaptation and loss and damage. So these are some of the research gaps which some of you can pick up and then try to see whether you can do some research and generate some sort of evidence for the climate action in the future. So like finally, the climate crisis is here. So once upon a time, we used to wonder whether there is climate change or not, but it is there. It is evident, and everyone is affected, and more than 1 billion people are at risk. So when we look at emission cuts, so they are only the long-term solution. And it will be too late for the most vulnerable people. So adaptation is the one, and resilience is the one which is required at this hour. And we need to support the next generation who are going to face these extreme challenges, maybe 10 times more than we are facing now. We need to empower these young people to be ready to be climate champions so that they can take the world leadership and take the world forward and adapt to these climate changes which are happening. And thank you, everyone. And thank you.
So there are a few questions, sir. Shall I proceed with the question?
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, there is a negative externality because of the, greenhouse gas emissions happening somewhere else, but the small island developing states receive the impact of it. So in that context, sir, what role an international community can do to support or mitigate climate change impact on small island developing states? What is the role of an international community, sir?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is I can say that the topic which is discussed in every climate summit annually, what we call it as a conference of parties of UNFCCC. So the last one is in November, what we called it as COP27, which happened in Egypt. So there are 3-4 important areas which will be discussed. One is supporting these affected countries. So as you know that the biggest debate is that countries like Maldives, so they don't emit any carbon gases. It's very, very, very negligible. It's in 0.00001% of the emissions. Now, they are the one who are suffering the most because of the countries, highly polluting countries, which are some are richer, some are not richer. So the world community need to support these countries which are being affected, severely affected by no fault of theirs. So some of the areas where it is being discussed is one is in terms of the technology transfer. So technology which is being adopted in other countries. So transferring it to countries which are affected free of cost, and also little bit of additional support to them to actually roll out the technology in their own countries. And the second one is in terms of the capacity development, capacity of the countries. Like for example, we took an example of Maldives. The country is very small, ministries are very small, so they don't have capacity to absorb all the they don't have capacity to handle and then absorb all the scientific evidence which is rolling out across the world. So there need to be a capacity development and human resources support which is required for these affected countries. And the third one, and the most important one, is finance. So access to finance is also very important, because the way the banks calculate the finance is in terms of in terms of GNI. Now, when you come to countries like Maldives, as you know, that population is very less, 500,000. Now, when they calculate based on the GNI, so that country will not be eligible for any loan. Forget about grant, so not even loan. So access to finance is another important area. And as you know that all the in climate summits and all, almost few years back, 2015 in Paris Agreement, the countries committed for $100 billion fund for affected countries who are not emitting adequate gases. But countries have to pull up that money, contribute. Until now, that is not happening. And it is happening, of course, but at a very, very slower pace. So capacity building, finance, and technology transfer, these are some of the areas where these countries which are affected by climate change with no fault of theirs need to be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think you covered three important suggestions. One is technology transfer, second is capacity building, and third is climate finance. So thank you for that. So the second question is by Elisa. What will be the long-term impact of artificial islands, sir? Will it have any impact on the environment in the long run? Artificial islands.
Yeah, definitely there will be both short-term and long-term impacts. It's not a environmentally sustainable activity. So there is a lot of criticism within the island countries. Also, there are people who severely oppose creating new islands. But yeah, they don't have other economically viable options. So as you know, creating an island takes 10 years or more than 10 years. So they have to do the sand pumping from around 2 to 3 kilometers inside the ocean. So from there, they have to pump the sand to a location over a period of 10 years so that an island, layer by layer, the island can be built. And it's extremely expensive and ecologically destructive activity. Now, so there were in Maldives, there is an artificial island which is connected to the capital. So it is built at 6 feet higher than the capital MAHE. So that means the capital, when it gets submerged, so this island will still be there for a few more years. And a population more than the Maldives capital island are living here right now, and they're able to build 25-story and 30-story apartments for people. So their argument is that they need to build infrastructure in such a way that the whole Maldives population, if all the islands are submerged, they can come and stay here, because this is going to survive. They built at 6 feet high. It is going to survive for another 50 years at least. So that means 2 generations. So in a nutshell, it's not a sustainable option, but currently they look at as the most viable option in front of them among all the other options. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, last question. We have in the 3 minutes. Sir, how UNICEF and other agencies are supporting in this change to help the SIDS countries?
Yeah, some of the areas what we do is primarily UNICEF and other UN agencies. They focus on building capacity of the government system in terms of developing their commitments. So what we call it as voluntary national reviews and voluntary commitments, which they need to submit to to the climate group every 5 years. So these agencies work with them to look at what is the appropriate way the country can commit so that they'll be able to help their communities to better adapt. So the second area what we support is in terms of communication. As we saw, communicating climate information and climate data to the communities who are at the facing end. So it is the most important components. They need to understand what are the consequences, what is going to happen 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the line, and how they need to take care of their islands. So for example, in some places, there is a feasibility of planting certain plants and saplings which are which reduce erosion. And there are some places where they can build a new seawall. There are places where they can build a new infrastructure like harbor or an airport or something which also contributes to the protection of the coastal area. And some areas, wetlands, so how they need to preserve, and also mangroves, their importance, and then how they need to preserve. So like this, lot of the information and data need to be given to the community. So that is a second area, communicating that information and developing new information is another area. So we'll be working on. And then UNICEF especially, they are focused on empowering young people because they are the people who are going to face the extreme consequences of the climate change 20 years, 30 years from now. So making them champions and then helping them to raise their voice in both national and international fora. So we support young people to go to climate conferences and talk about what is happening in their islands so that the global community will understand what is going to happen to them. And the fourth one is in terms of including the climate issues in the curriculum of both primary and secondary school as well as university curriculums. So inculcating some of those lessons because they are growing, the young people are growing, the children are growing in the midst of a big threat in their lifetime. And they have to be aware, and then during their studies, they have to understand, they have to try to come out with innovative solutions. And we strongly believe that young people have capacity to handle the climate changes which are going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years. So we need to equip them from now. So it need to be included in the curriculum, and so that the children and young people will learn from that and try to develop a perspective and try to develop innovative solutions for the future. And the last but not the least is supporting in terms of the policy areas in each country. So policy areas in terms of the building code for the infrastructure. And also in terms of management of waste and in terms of policies and legislations in terms of utilization of carbon fuels or fossil fuels. So these are some of the policy areas we are supporting to these small island countries. And we also work especially with them to bring them on a platform to discuss their issues and share their experiences, knowledge exchange, as well as innovative solutions exchange between these groups so that they'll be able to learn from each other. So next year we are having not next year, this year sometime in July, August, we'll be having a SIDS conference, young people conference in Maldives. So all countries are actively working for that. And if anybody is interested in working in SIDS, they can explore in the coming days. There will be information which will be disseminated, so they can join this conference and then try to understand better. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I think 2 words, if I can pick from your statement, is I think you are helping them in climate governance and climate communications. And this transcends across macro, meso, and micro level of governance and multi-level, because it's a systems issue. It's not an issue specific, but the complex adaptive system which has to come together to solve the issue of climate change. So I think this was a fantastic experience listening to you. Feels so good. One, because we know each other for a long time. The second is the kind of, you explain the complex topic in a very simplistic manner. And there are a lot of messages for institutions like us, where we need to focus, how we need to build our curriculum, where are the research gaps, and how we can strengthen. Sir, we look forward for your support in future also. I think this particular session and the activities after this, I think, sir, we will definitely contact you for further guidance. Sir, coming to the end of this session, from Prasanna School of Public Health, we really thank you for taking your time out. I know there's a time difference. It's already maybe around 8:30 there in Indonesia. So thank you so much, sir. And I'd like to thank Professor Rajani Prasanna, benefactor, Prasanna School of Public Health, for initiating this such a noble lecture series, which can bring different perspectives together to solve a very important issue which is impacting worldwide. Mr. D.A. Prasanna, Chief Patron, Prasanna School of Public Health, for supporting us in all the endeavors we aim for. And for Founding Director, Professor Helmut Brand, for encouraging us to get involved in these events. And here we have a team, Dr. Rahul, Dr. Vani, co-editor, Viola and Nachket, who are with me here in this boardroom, and all the faculty members of Prasanna School of Public Health who are supporting, and many students who have joined in this lecture. I really thank all of you. I think there are several messages which we need to take forward from this lecture. Sir, we promise you we will definitely take some of these initiatives and include in some of our curriculum and research domains. We look forward for your guidance, sir. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join this meeting.